What's the most disturbing secret you've discovered about someone close to you? Story 1. The 24 hours before my dad passed away, stage 4 lung cancer, he was in the ER and then the ICU, and we were unable to be with him because of hospital COVID rules. My mother, sister, and I had been texting and calling him all day and got no response. My mother even called the hospital and spoke with one of his ICU nurses who said he was awake and communicating fine. He passed away very quickly at 3:30 a.m. the next morning. We were allowed to be at his bedside, but by then he was no longer conscious. So we said our goodbyes and he was gone. Later that morning, while my mom slept, I was calling cremation services to schedule his body for pickup at the hospital, and going through his bag of belongings the hospital had returned to us. His phone was there and I wanted to read all our texts and take some comfort in my last words to him. I opened his phone and all our texts had not been read. Not mine or my mom and sister's. I thought this was so odd, but figured he must have been suffering so much he couldn't find the strength. I began to scroll through his apps and noticed a chat app I'd vaguely heard of. I can't recall the name, but it essentially works like WhatsApp. I opened the app and saw a single contact with a female name. So I started reading and realized my dad had been cheating with this girl hourly for the last 24 hours, and as far back as I could scroll. He was calling her princess and telling her he loved her. And she was saying she was scared for him and wanted to know what was going on, why he was in the ER, etc. I scrolled back enough to know that this was someone he was having at the very least an emotional affair with. My grief was completely hijacked by hurt and anger, and a week later I tracked the girl down and spoke to her via DMS and found out she was a 19-year-old girl. She was 17 when they met. He was her high school bus driver, and she told me they had been dating for almost 2 years. My dad was 65 years old when he passed away and dated someone younger than his grandchildren, someone he chose to spend his last moments with and say his last goodbyes to. I hope it made him happy, but it sure is a crappy secret to live the rest of my life with. A secret that will forever overshadow my entire relationship with my dad, with no chance to ever speak to him about it. It's the one secret I wish I'd never found out. Story 2. I don't know how disturbing this is. It turned out pretty fantastic for one, but not for another. I was adopted and told a silly magical story about my birth parents that most certainly didn't seem true even when I was a child. At 57, I learned I was the result of a college affair between a very serious Jewish young man and a very Baptist young woman who was rushed off to a home for wayward girls to give birth. He followed her there many states away, begging her to keep me and live a life together. But their families both said absolutely not. Jewish people were not viewed as white in the mid-60s, and her family most certainly did not want her to marry a non-white. Plus, she was a very committed Christian and didn't want to convert to Judaism. So off I went into another family. I recently discovered 3 loving half-siblings, and we're all pro or semi-pro musicians and get along well. I never got to meet my mother. She passed away a year before I searched her. My father is out of the picture and wants to be left alone, and I'm fine with that. I'm grateful for the love he gave me. It was enough. Another person that was in my non-bio family was also adopted, and she was older than me. She tracked down her mother later in life, too. She was in a hospital and had been since the day she was born holistically disabled. Physical, mental, cognitive, learning, and sensory, and was raped by an orderly. And she discovered she was the result. The endings to our search are not always happy. Reply 1. I am an adoptee and have found my biological mother. She never talked about how she became pregnant with me, nor did she give me the name of my biological father. She has since passed away. Sometimes I think that I may be better off not knowing. Story 3. She was my best friend of 7 years. We had literally been through it all together. I moved out of state with my now husband, but she convinced us both to move back to be closer with her after about a year. We had no real ties to the state we had just tried out, so we said screw it, let's go back. She's basically family. We were all so happy to be reunited. She was over almost every night for dinner, and we all laughed and talked and had a blast. Best year of my life. Then slowly she started trying to turn my husband and me against each other. Anytime we had an argument, like any couple does, she would text each of us about how right we were, trying to foster animosity between the two of us. With me, she started talking about how she had a plan B for us, that if my husband and I couldn't make it anymore, I could move in with her and we'd live happy lives together. With my husband, she started talking about her infertility issues and how she wanted to have a kid just like him. She just needed a sperm donor. This all happened around the same time, and my husband and I compared texts and figured it out. She wanted to take his sperm and have a baby with me. When confronted about it, she refused to admit anything and started lashing out at both of us. It got to the point where she would show up unannounced, banging on the door, demanding a place in our home. It was so terrifying and panic-inducing that we ended up having to move and change our phone numbers. I guess it's so disturbing because I had never had a friend like her, only to find out that she cared about me, but in such an unhealthy and scary way. But yeah, that's my story. My husband and I are great now, by the way. Story 4. A work colleague appeared on the front page of a national newspaper for a life of fraudulent qualifications. He claimed medical and law degrees, was a brigadier in the Army Reserves, and was the CEO of a major health fund. He actually was a brigadier in the Army Reserves, but that and the health fund role were largely built on fraudulent qualifications and a progression of jobs also based on these claims. In reality, the only qualification he actually held was as a mortuary assistant. Not even his wife knew. The fraudulent degrees had been gained when he was in the Army Reserves recruiting, and he had access to submitted position applications. He came undone when he applied for a government job, and some flags were raised by the recruitment people. He tried to withdraw the application but didn't realize that an application for a government role has the same weight as a statutory declaration and cannot be withdrawn. It all went south very quickly, and he ended up doing jail time. Whoa, this story is truly baffling. To think someone could carry on such a high-stakes charade for so long without anyone noticing is mind-boggling. His ability to convincingly weave this web of lies is disturbingly impressive. It's a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving and credibility should always be checked. Story 5. I was pretty close with my youngest uncle growing up, at least in pictures. He was in his mid-20s when I was like 5 for context. One day, when I was in middle school, he just stopped coming around completely. My entire family told us kids that he was backpacking around the nation. In high school, I was doing a genealogy project on my grandfather, his dad, and accidentally found my uncle's name on the sex offender registry. Came to find out he was running a CP ring and had served 16 years in federal prison. He's out now, and my family pretends nothing happened. I stay far away. Story 6. My great-grandmother was married to 3 different people at the same time. The men were from different branches of the military. She was collecting all 3 of their paychecks at a time. Story 7. One night as a kid, I heard my parents having an explosive argument in their bedroom, which suddenly went quiet. The door was closed and locked. I found out during a drunk phone call from my mother it was because she attempted to shoot my father in the face with a .303, but it didn't go off when she pulled the trigger as there were no bullets. They were both horrified, and they just stared at each other, apparently. They're still together. Story 8. Discovered that my sister stole my father's $25,000 Rolex not more than 24 hours after he passed away. I only discovered it when she and her husband made a frivolous purchase, and I wondered where they got the money since they were always broke and begging my parents for money. I got suspicious. It hit me that she might have stolen and sold the Rolex. Had the paperwork, ran a track on the sales history, and discovered it had been sold to a pawn shop down the street from where my sister lives. Went to the pawn shop and after a bit of persuasion got them to tell me who sold it to them, and it was my sister. Me and my mom disowned her. Reply 1. As my grandmother took her last breath, she lay there on her bed in her room alongside my mother, sister, brother, aunt, and me. She was an amazing woman, and it was a terribly sad event to lose her. My aunt began putting lotion on her hands, and at the time, I don't think any of us thought much of it. I think I recall thinking, "Aw, that's sweet." It was a little strange, but I just thought she was doing it because my grandma's hands may have looked dry, and it was maybe the last time she'd ever be able to do something like that for her. My sister yells out in a very angry, aggressive tone, "You b-" And we all kind of step back like, whoa, what the f just happened? What's going on here? We're all puzzled, looking at my sister like, what was that about? She then says she just slipped her ring off her finger. That was a bad day. My aunt then rushed the sale on the house, even though my mom didn't want to sell it at all. My family has been fractured ever since that day. Story 9. My grandfather beat someone to death. My dad was an only child, but my grandmother was once pregnant with my dad's younger brother. When she was 6 months pregnant, someone in construction equipment ran over the car she was driving, and she lost the baby. While she was in the hospital, my grandfather found the guy and beat him to death. From what I understand, he was in jail for about a week before he was released. Apparently, he claimed temporary insanity due to the circumstances. I learned all this about 4 years ago when my brother was researching family history and asked my grandfather about it. I've always seen him as a nice little old man. Whoa, talk about a plot twist. Learning that your sweet old grandpa had such a dark chapter in his life must have been a complete shocker. It's scary what pain and grief can push people to do. Not saying it was right, but it does paint a picture of a man pushed past his breaking point. Story 10. Found out after his death that my great-uncle was a grand wizard in the KKK. Opened a chest in his attic with photos from rallies, lynchings, and cross-burnings all around some rural parts of Alabama. We were actually horrified by the discovery and suddenly realized why he was so negative towards his black hospice nurse, who was otherwise kind-hearted and caring with him and the family. Edit. Since a very large number of you want to keep calling me racist / telling me how much of a fuck-up I was for burning everything, we, as in my family, I was 16 at the time and had no real say in what the adults / elders decided to burn all of it out of intense shame for what we discovered. We held prayer vigils through our local church for the people affected by this hatred. Had I been older, I might have taken some of the more damning photos and forwarded them to people who could have brought closure to victims. I made this post at great risk to remain in my family, as they would still see this as romanticizing his actions. To my family, simply speaking his name is done so at great risk to your standing on wills / remaining part of the family. So yes, I do feel like it's too late because the only thing I have is that my uncle was a member of the KKK for an unknown amount of time before 1950. My family has prided itself in being very inclusive towards other races / ethnic backgrounds. My 7th-generation grandmother was a member of the Underground Railroad, and several of my other great-aunts and uncles were vocal figureheads of the civil rights movement. They acted as anyone with that much history behind them would in a moment of shock. They were destroyed. Blame them if you wish, but please stop blaming me. I didn't make any decisions, and for me, it's too late to report anything, because I don't have any useful information on something that happened a very long time ago for me. I do sincerely apologize to anyone who sees their chances for closure going up in flames, but I can assure you that for how many other Klansmen I saw in those photos, surely some of their families have already submitted evidence after their passing. My uncle has literally been deleted from our family history, even in such detail as to remove his gravestone so that people cannot leave flowers for him. Story 11. My brother was stealing money from his father who had dementia. This went on for over a year, and then I found out about it because the bank that had my father's mortgage called me wondering why it hadn't been paid in 6 months. My father's bank account went into the negative around this time too, and when I confronted my brother about it, he said, "Well, I gotta pay my bills." I was about to take control of all the accounts and make sure the shot got back on track, but my father ended up in the hospital and passed away shortly after that. My brother also stole some of my inheritance too. In the end, he stole over $5,000 from his dying father. Story 12. So my grandmother, who's been estranged from my family for a very long time now for a multitude of reasons, has this weird thing where she has to share food with people. Are you ordering steak at the restaurant? Well, oh boy, she's gotta order the same thing even if she doesn't like it. Try her drink, it's really good. Take the first bite of chicken to let her know if it's any good. This always really annoyed me because I hate sharing food. One day I brought it up to my mom and she was like, "Oh yeah, Grandma is afraid of being poisoned, so she wants other people to try it first." So let me get this straight. Grandma thinks someone is trying to poison her, so she has me trying the food first? And it makes so much sense looking back because she literally would not take a bite of anything she ordered until someone else had a bite first. Thanks, Grandma. Story 13. After my husband passed away in 2020, I found out he had been having an affair with a 30-year-old. He was 55. She apparently aborted his baby, and everything he told me about his prior life was a lie. Second marriage for both of us. And he had been having fun with men since he was in his early 20s. To sum it up, I didn't know this man at all. We had been together for 10 years and married for 6. Story 14. While my cousin was walking around with her son in the woods, she came across a hunting stand, climbed it, and found a pair of binoculars. Sitting straight forward and lifting the binoculars to her eyes, she saw her own bedroom window. Let's be logical here. If it was a legit hunting stand, it was facing and closer than 500 feet to a residence, which is illegal and means it had to come down with prejudice. If it was a peeping Tom, well, it had to come down with prejudice. So when my brother and I visited not long after, she showed us where it was. We tore it down and literally wrapped it around a couple of trees, bent the to complete uselessness. I got an angry call the next day. "Did you tear down my hunting stand yesterday?" "Yeah, I did." "That was your uncle's, her mother's brother." Turns out my cousin reported it to the family and they ignored the issue. When the uncle was asked, he said there was just an old tree house out there. Even when he was exposed, they didn't really care since they were more upset about the damage we did. Suffice it to say, I have written off most of that side of the family. That's some messed up family dynamics right there. How creepy and unsettling it must have been for your cousin to spot her own bedroom window from that hunting stand. And your family's reaction to it, rather than supporting her, is so disappointing. Good on you and your brother for stepping up and taking down that stand.
Please leave your story down below in the comments. I would absolutely love to make a video about them in the future. And also don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, peace.